So, over the years, ever since Egghead ended in the manga, people have made various correlations trying to compare Eustass Kid to Vegapunk. Now that we are in Elbaf within the manga, people are trying to make correlations between Kid and Roxy Zebek. Both of these correlations, I think, are unfounded, not really stepping on the toes of any one person, but the amount of theories I have heard over the years and even in the last few months don't really make a lot of sense. So we're going to tackle all the Vegapunk ones first, and then we'll go into a few of the Zebek theories that I think don't add up. So tackling the Vegapunk stuff first, a lot of people have been saying that Kid could have some sort of correlation to Vegapunk. And one of the more popular theories is that because he has a 07 on the side of his construct called Damned Punk, people think that makes him some sort of Vegapunk satellite, because Vegapunk satellites, Shaka through York, are numbered 1 through 6. So that's why people think that Kid is related to Vegapunk in that way. However, this makes no sense because we have a abbreviated history of whom Kid is. We know where he grew up at. We've seen him as a child. Vegapunk satellites are biologically all 2 years old. They have different set ages, such as Lilith being 24 and York being 16, but in reality, they all have existed for only 2 years, meaning that most likely they were born during the time of the time skip. So, no, Kid cannot be a Vegapunk satellite. Moving on from that, people think because Kid uses Punk a lot in his attack names that he is somehow related to Vegapunk, and I see how this could be confusing. However, I think both Vegapunk and Kid are tackling two different meanings or uses of the word punk. So when you look at Vegapunk's name, the punk in Vegapunk most likely is meant to represent how punk is used in a lot of science fiction settings that have a very strong technological presence. So let's say diesel punk or cyberpunk or steampunk. With that being said, looking at the iconography around Egghead Island and how the star is used quite commonly in multiple things that Vegapunk has created, it is likely that the Vega in Vegapunk is related to the Vega star in our real world, which is a part of the Lyra constellation and has been used for navigational purposes and is one of the brightest stars in the sky, which makes a lot of sense because Vegapunk is the brightest mind in the One Piece world. So breaking down what his name means, you could say his name is actually Star Punk, which makes a lot of sense because if you take him as a genre onto himself in the series of One Piece, all the weird science fiction stuff finds its way back to Vegapunk in one way or another. Cyborgs, gene splicing, aliens, all have something to do with Vegapunk. For example, even though Frankie is the primary cyborg in the series and introduces us to the concept, Frankie's father, Cyan, otherwise known as Queen, did work with Vegapunk when they both were a part of MADS. Then, it's been highly speculated, and I believe this to be true, but how Frankie built himself up to be a cyborg after being run over by the sea train was most likely due in part to him coming across the abandoned ship of Mads. But even when it comes to the aliens in One Piece that we see during the Aniru cover story, they too have some loose connection to Vegapunk because that cover story does involve Vegapunk's home island, known as Katakuri Island, otherwise known as the future country Baltimore. Dr. Tsukimi lived in Baltimore. He built these four automata. Said four automata, along with Dr. Tsukimi, witnessed an explosion that happened on the moon caused by Aniru. Said explosion caused Dr. Tsukimi to have a heart attack. Then the automata took balloons, flew up to the moon, and investigated what caused the explosion and the death of their creator. So even when you're talking about the sci-fi element of aliens, that has some loose connection back to Vegapunk. So you could say when it comes to non-seafaring affairs, Vegapunk is the genesis point for all the weird science fiction stuff that happens in One Piece. Therefore, he is the genre science fiction in One Piece onto himself in that way. But when it comes to Kid and his utilization of the word punk, it's all just a big music reference and a big music pun. From the nature of his attacks down to the names of a lot of people in his crew, as well as some of their appearances, are all music puns and music references. So when you look at, say, Punk Rotten, that looks like Rox D. Zebek, I will say. And it's not lost on me that the man is called Rox D. Zebek, even though we find out that's not his real name. But Rox, I don't think, is even a music pun onto itself. I don't know what that means for Zebek, but we need more information as of this recording. But when it relates to Kid, Punk Rotten is a reference to Johnny Rotten, who was the lead singer in a British punk rock band known as Sex Pistols. And this goes for Punk Vice, which is a reference to another punk rock band called Vice Squad. You have Slam Gibson, which is a reference to guitar smashing, meaning slamming your guitar on stage. But then when you look at his crew, specifically guys like, say, Killer looks like a member of Daft Punk. See, we got the music pun in there again. So everything is just a music pun, and canonically, Kid is a lover of music. Also, there's a guy named Mosh on his crew in a reference to mosh pits. There's a woman on his crew named Dive, which is a reference to crowd diving. And then we have Hip and Hop, which is a reference to another genre of music called hip hop. So when it comes to punk and reference to Kid, it's all a big music pun. But when it comes to Vegapunk and Kid both being brilliant inventors, this is not a valid correlation either, because whereas Vegapunk is a brilliant inventor and does make things that other people can use without his intervention, Kid is not built that way. Kid is simply an artist. Kid makes big sculptures out of metal and throws them at people. His constructs don't work without him being there. He is not a shipwright in any stretch of the imagination. You see this looking at Victoria Punk. Victoria Punk is just a basic ship with a big skull on the front of it. It's not technologically advanced in any stretch of the imagination, which is weird considering you would think if he was a big shipwright inventor guy like Vegapunk or Frankie, that the Victoria Punk should have similar advantages like the Sunny does, but it doesn't. It's just a regular ship, which I say that to say Kid himself is not a shipwright. He's not an inventor. He's just a guy who can make things fast because of his creative mind, but also the magnet fruit, which makes him a metal shop artist. And you even see this when he's depicted as a child with his toy robot. The robot does not function. It does not walk around. He's holding it as if it were a doll. So in the present, all of his constructs are just that. Big dolls, big puppets that he moves around using his devil fruit powers. They aren't functional mechanisms. They don't work without him. Now, with that being said, a big point of contention that was on my Discord, the Digital Burrow, was that Kid has some correlation to Vegapunk because they both have the utilization of lasers. This is not true. When a laser shows up in One Piece, the information and language surrounding said laser is very specific. When it comes to the slow fruit, it's specifically called a laser made up of photons. When it comes to the love fruit, it's compared to the slow fruit as a joke. Even when it comes to the hollow fruit, the holograms on Egghead are compared to the ghost of the hollow fruit, which could mean that the hollow fruit ghosts are made up of photons as well, because jokes in that way usually correlate one thing to the other. Now, when it comes to Vegapunk's lasers, all of his lasers and all the people who have researched his lasers to make their own lasers all come from the research done on Kizaru's fruit, known as the Glint fruit, which again are just photons. So with that being said, every laser in One Piece, as far as I know, is either specifically called a photon or is compared to another thing that is a photon. When it comes to Eustass, Captain Kidd, and the Magnet Fruit, he has nothing to do with photons. What Damned Punk is simply a construct of a gun that he made, which is basically just a funnel of which he stores a bunch of scrap into and then fires that scrap out using electromagnetic force, because he has the magnet fruit. He is a magnet man. He is not a laser man. So in the fight between himself, Law, and Big Mom, where he uses Damned Punk for the first time, he is launching a big stake or a big missile of scrap into Big Mom, and this is consistent over several panels. So it's not a art shadow, it's not a foible of the illustration, it's a actual object that he is launching into Big Mom, and he is keeping up the force through the constant stream of electromagnetic force that he is pulsing out of the barrel of the gun. However, like I said previously, the gun is just a funnel. It does not function like a normal gun. It is not an invention. It is a construct that can only work because Kidd is using it. That is why Damned Punk is often referred to as being like a railgun, because like a railgun, Kidd utilizes electromagnetic force to launch out a big steel bullet at an opponent. Also, just a reminder, at no point in the manga does Kidd's magnetism have any force onto itself to affect a person or an object not made of metal unless he is using his awakened ability. So, the force of his electromagnetism cannot be turned into a laser. That is why when you see it being used in the Shanks fight and in the Big Mom fight, he's simply launching out scrap at a very, very high rate. In the Shanks vision, perhaps he's using multiple streams of scrap, and that is how he can blow those ships away. But against Big Mom, he's using a single stake of scrap and is pushing that stake of scrap or that missile of scrap into her. So, moving on. With that being said, no, Kidd is not an inventor, and no, Kidd does not utilize lasers. Another important aspect of Kidd just being an artist and that being consistent throughout One Piece is in an art request that we see in chapter 1012, in which he just makes a mechanical bird, and then a bunch of baby birds are resting in his hair because it looks like a bird's nest while their mother looks on. And the bird in question that he makes has the number 81 on it, drawing back to the fact that when you see random numbers on his constructs, that doesn't mean anything. The random numbers literally don't mean anything. They're just random numbers. Cool visual cues to emphasize that the construct in question is made out of a bunch of random scrap, and it's made to look cool to fit Kidd's aesthetic. So I've heard a few theories surrounding Kidd having some relation to Xebec. Some are completely unfounded and ridiculous, while others make some sense but don't really add up all the way. So a big one I've heard is that Kid is some sort of clone of Roxy Zebek. This is completely unfounded and we have no evidence, nor does Kid act like Zebek in any particular way. Nor do they have the same skills, nor do they have any traits that are similar to one another. The only trait they have in common is that both of them have spiky hair. So, with that being said, that leads us into the second thing. So, Roger calls Zebek a porcupine because of his hair. Luffy has called Kid Jaggy, most likely because of his hair. And that's the long and the short of the Zebek and Kid correlation, which I find super weak. Because the reason probably why Luffy calls Kid Jaggy is not just because of his hair, it's because he has a jagged personality and he fights with jagged metals. So his whole theme is being jagged and hard, like metal. Therefore, that's probably why Luffy calls Kid Jaggy. And in turn, Kid calls Luffy Stupid Monkey because, well, he acts like a monkey and his last name is literally Monkey. So there you go. Much like how Luffy calls Trafalgar D. Water Law Traffy or Tora Guy or Tora Man, because when you Romanize Trafalgar, it has the word Tora in it. Tora in Japanese just means tiger. So all the names Law is given are most likely just because of his hat, because his hat and his pants have a snow leopard print on them, and snow leopards are related to tigers. So it's like a dumb cat pun based on his clothes and how his name is spelled. It's not that big of a deal. It's a dumb joke. So I say have to say, with Kid being called Jaggy, that too is just a dumb joke based on his appearance and what he uses in combat. Same way how Roger calls Zebek Porcupine, just based on his appearance. So that's the long and the short of it. Kid is nothing like Roxy Zebek. I hate to be the fun police here, but there's not a lot to really stand on that's a concrete correlation. But with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede. What?